Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest, Season 1, Episode 2. It is called Ghosts. So full spoilers for the episode, as always. It's always interesting watching an Episode 2 of a show, because, especially for network shows, and especially, this isn't that old, but older shows, where they make a pilot in advance, and then it gets greenlit, it becomes a show. So there's usually a couple of changes when you get to episode 2. The most common thing usually being that there's not an opening title sequence for the first episode. It'll just be like kind of like pretty generic, relatively sort of credits that are just put on top. Whereas here, this episode starts with the kind of the traditional network TV thing of let's explain the premise to the audience who maybe didn't see the first episode. And it'll probably be here at the start of every episode for a while. Star Trek had these, not all of them, but some of them did. Buffy had this, here's the basic gist of the show, here's the idea, and off we go, just so that anyone can jump in. Because certainly for network TV, the network that is, would have wanted the ability for anyone to jump in at any point. And this episode definitely feels like that, where it makes a point of recapping and giving you basic ideas of the concept of the show. Point in fact, the opening minute and a half is effectively the end of a job that we didn't see the rest of. We just see Reese go to this elevator where there's a guy who's going to meet up with his mistress, but the two guys in the elevator are hitmen who are there to kill him because his wife's hired them, and he saves the guy, right? And it's just a quick thing to say, here's him finishing another job. It gets the point across. But it's kind of fun because when he steps into the elevator at the start, I think it works as an episode 2 open for people who watch the episode 1, because you immediately go, oh, what's the story here? What is he intervening in? There's almost a bit of excitement when you see him, because it's like, okay, this means something. We just don't know what yet. And it's very quick. It's over. I think I actually checked and it was like a minute and a half into the episode by the time it was over. So, it didn't take a long time, but it's just establishing or re-establishing the key ideas of the show. And of course, we've got our case of the week. But I think the big thing to talk about with this is the start of the flashbacks, which we get in this episode. And we get this cool thing where it always transitions to them with like a timeline. Like we're inside the machine and it's going back the years. So there's always like solid context for when these flashbacks are taking place. And I don't think this little transition technique was in the first episode. In fact, just in general, I feel like this episode has a lot more, and this is just transitionary shots between regular scenes, but they'll often piece together two scenes with some general shots in between of security camera footage of the city. And this idea that we're always it reminds me a lot in a weird way of Angel. I already brought up Buffy, the hit television show, but the spin-off Angel had this transition thing it did all the time, where it would do these like quick shots of the city, but it would do these sort of whooshing effects. This is basically this show's version of that, where you get the camera footage of just strangers or just people passing by in the street. And it just kind of sets the tone that we're always being watched, because it kind of fits into the theme. But we get this cool transition to the flashbacks where it goes through the timeline, and we get introduced to sort of the origins, to some extent, of the machine from Harold, and him working with someone else, played by Brett Cullen, who he was in Dark Knight Rises, I think. In fact, there's another actor in this. There's the hitman guy that pops up in the episode was in the Dark Knight. It took me a second because his hair was shorter, but I'm pretty sure he's the guy in the Dark Knight who, when the Joker comes in, he's like, I want to hear a proposition. I think that's him. He's got the long hair at the back, though, in that movie. But we're introduced to... so his name's Ingram, and you see that at the end of the episode, because it ends very ominously on this statue, this dedication statue of Nathan Ingram. But he's at the front for I almost said Ben, because I'm so used to Michael Emerson on Lost, but for Finch. He's like the front guy for Finch. While he was building the machine, Ingram was the one doing the award ceremonies and things like that, and that's what we see in the first flashback in 2002, where he comes back and says, oh, we've got another award, you're building this machine, how's it working? And it's like, yeah, this is going to take years. And sure enough, the next flashback we get is in 2007, 5 years later. And this is what introduces an interesting thing, because while some of the actual cases each week will probably be fun, and I think the one in this is okay, like it's got some fun little bits to it, but I think the more interesting thing for me as a big fan of TV shows and serialized characters is the building of the greater picture. And even though we're not deep into the greater picture story-wise yet, it's already doing things with the characters to build those elements. And the big thing here is this, where last episode we're introduced to Finch and that he wants to help save the people who are deemed irrelevant by the system, because the system's only looking for terror attacks and things of that nature. So that was like a key part of the show that was set up in the first episode. And then this flashback immediately says, no, wait a minute. It's not as straightforward as that, because he didn't always feel that way. Here it shows that someone else felt that way, and Finch kind of justifies the way things are. Like, this is what the purpose of the machine is, but it's Ingram who's feeling guilty, who's looking at all these faces on the computer screen and saying, how can you live with this? These people, have died, and we could have done something about it, and instead we aren't. And immediately you start to get this idea that, okay, this current philosophy that Finch has and his drive to do something about it is obviously fueled and comes from this person. And then the reveal at the end of the episode that this person is seemingly dead and has the building, dedicated to him with a statue, like that, like right away you're like, okay, not only does Finch want to be good, we also get the idea now that he's not only wanting to be good just in general, but he's trying to make up for what he didn't do before. And immediately, like, his entire thing has got an extra layer to it. It is more interesting. And I think everything with Finch and Reese in this episode, this back and forth where right from the get-go, Reese is trying to, like, follow Finch to find out more about him because he's so mysterious so far. And he's doing okay, but then he turns the corner when he's on the phone to him, and Finch isn't nowhere to be seen. He's Batmaned out of the scene, effectively. And he says on the phone, hey, Mr. Reese, we'll meet on my time. He knew he was following him. And you're thinking, oh, okay, he won up Reese. And Reese is really good at what he does. So that, like, gives you an idea. But then, of course, it's back and forth throughout the episode, because then next time this comes up is we see Finch go to, like, a day job. And it's so weird, because you almost think it could be a flashback, even though there wasn't a transition to it that way. Just because it's like, oh, he's like a lackey here. He's like a regular guy being told by the manager what to do at his computer job. But sure enough, he goes into his cubicle and there's Reese. He's found him. And it turns out that Finch is hiding in plain sight by working as an employee in a company that he actually owns, but no one knows he's the boss. He's the secret boss. I never watched that show where the boss infiltrates, like, the workforce. Was it called Secret Boss? It was something like that, but that's effectively what he's doing. And you're like, oh, this shows how good Reese is. He's caught him off guard. They're not ready to trust each other yet, and there's a lot of talk of trust in this episode. But the great payoff to this is that later in the episode, when Reese goes back here, and this is what leads to the ending, is that Finch is so private and is so clearly, I don't want to say annoyed. That doesn't feel like the right word. But he's so secretive and protective of who he is that he has completely burned this secret identity, if you want to call it that. He's, fired himself, or he's transferred himself, and he's left this building. No one who works there is ever going to see him again. And it's like, no, he burned this entire thing. Like, not the workplace, but he burned this identity for himself because he didn't want anyone knowing about this. And just the fact that someone saw him talking to Reese there might be what set this up, or it's just Reese knowing himself is a problem for him. So it's almost like the show of trust from Reese at this point might even be to just not look into where he's hiding next, kind of thing. Maybe just not pursue it. I don't know if that's what's going to happen. I don't remember, but I thought all this stuff was really strong because it kind of showed that even though the opening, which explains the premise of the show, makes it sound like it's been going for a while, just because it has to be evergreen, and after a while it'll just feel right. This is early days. This is only the second episode, and these two aren't, like, trusting of each other yet. There's still a rift there, there's still, it's not a friendship yet, right? It's something I suspect will form over time, but it isn't quite there. So I thought all that stuff was really interesting and had a little tinge of humor to it, which I really appreciated, that it didn't just feel super dry. It felt like a little funny when Reese went up to him, and then at the end when Finch went up to him, like, I mean, the ending one wasn't as funny so much, especially at the end when it sort of revealed the death of the guy in the flashbacks. Obviously that added some intrigue to the whole thing, but it had this kind of evolution as the show went on. As the episode went on, it wasn't content to just give you exactly what you thought you were going to get. And I think the regular case that we get here is full of like reveals and twists and turns. It feels a bit more generic compared to the rest of the episode, and that this is just a typical case. To the point where it even ends like the first act before the break for commercial, which obviously I'm not watching it with ads anymore, but like, the fade to black's still there. You can tell that's where the commercials were supposed to go. And sure enough, it ends in this dramatic line where it's like, oh, the name we got, like, it's a 15-year-old girl, but she died 2 years ago. And then the line that it ends on before the ads is Reese going, so we're chasing a ghost. And I could almost hear the CSI Miami like music come in as he said it. But the general plot's fine. It's it presents enough interesting bits of tension. It's particularly when Finch himself gets involved. He ends up babysitting the teenager at the hotel for a bit, and clearly he's not physically capable of keeping up with her if she wants to run away. So he has to try and talk to her a bit more. And when the hitman's actually coming to the hotel and he's actually trying to help her, and he's physically trying to outsmart the hitman and how to hide, how to not reveal where they are, all that stuff, like, that's actually quite exciting because we know he's not going to be capable of actually being in the fight. Obviously Reese shows up in just the nick of time at the very end of it, and that's fine, you expect that. But that was probably the most interesting part of it, was Finch himself putting himself in a line of danger, and at one point even saying, hey, you get out here even though I can't go that way. He's saying take the fire escape, and she's like, no, but you can't come with me, and she chooses to stay. So it's it's for any of the mysterious qualities that Finch has, it's showing that he cares about people, and he was effectively willing to let himself get killed there to try and save her. So it's giving you that thing to hold on to, the good character, sensibility. So the rest of it was like the uncle secretly was working, or made the dad work with the mob, so the mob killed the family except the girl. But now they want the land that he owned because it's like quadrupled in value, but the girl's inherited it even though she's on the run and everyone thinks she's dead. I mean, like, it kept throwing things at you. Reese goes to prison to talk to the hitman who did the job at one point. All of that just felt like typical TV plot stuff, where it was like, we have to keep like every like 5 minutes there has to be a new reveal to the plot. So it just kind of feels a bit ho-hum because of that. But that's not to say there's not some fun stuff in there. I really like the scene where he goes to like a bar to talk to the fixer for information. Lionel takes him there. It's someone that Lionel knows. And we see this all from Lionel's perspective, where Reese gets thrown out the bar and threatened with a gun and told to never come back, and Reese just stands up and walks back in, and we just hear the thuds and the crashes, and Lionel's trying to see what's going on, and then he comes walking out, and he's clearly got the information that he needed. It's simple. It's like it is kind of a way to get out of shooting a fight scene because you don't have to actually show it. But it's kind of like they're mixing and matching, like how much, because we had a fight with him and the hitman and the laundrette earlier in the episode. So you get a bit of both in each episode, so you never feel like you're shortchanged of the action scenes. Sometimes it's just fun to sort of like show and be a badass without have to actually see the whole thing. And I think those little moments work just fine. And from Lionel's perspective, who's this character who's sort of like under duress working for him, and there's a great line actually from them. The first time he goes to see him this episode, and he asks for the file on the case. Lionel brings up that Internal Affairs are looking into him because they quote think he's dirty, unquote. To which Reese says, "Because you are dirty." You are a dirty cop, Lionel. That's why I've got you under my thumb, because I've got all this stuff on you. I enjoyed that. It's almost this idea that Lionel's in denial and didn't necessarily realize to the extent of how far gone he was, which could make the possible redemption enjoyable, I think. No, as far as anything else in the main plot goes, there's a lot more. There's like wiretapping of phones and cloning of phones in this episode, and it's all fun enough. It's easy enough to like recounting every step of the main plot line this episode would be quite difficult because there's so many little bits to it, but it's all quite straightforward when you're watching it, and I don't think any of it rings it's not difficult to follow. There is definitely, it does definitely feel like people don't react in the city. Maybe this is a joke about New York and how people in New York will just be like, it's just New York, whatever. But there's a point where they're in the laundrette, and this teen girl that he's chasing after has pulled out like a little knife or blade, and he's like trying to talk to her, and it feels like the other people in the room are just like continuing to fold the laundry and just don't like whether or not whatever one you think is in the wrong here, whether he's like maybe a cop chasing after a delinquent, or she's a girl who's threatened by this old man who's trying to kidnap her. Whatever might run through your head when you see this scenario, no one's reacting to it. So, and then by the time the fight starts, I guess it just feels like everyone left by that point. But, yeah, I mean, that stuff's fine. There's a little bit of, obviously, Carter as well. And furthering this whole she's been treated as the Jim Gordon of the show kind of comes into it by the end, because Reese sends, or he says, he phones Carter and says that he's going to meet her, but instead he leaves the teen girl there to be taken in because he knows she's a good cop and that she can trust her. And I think that's that's something we set up last episode, is that she cared and tried to help Reese when he was the homeless guy, quote unquote. And now it's like, he's actually really dangerous. She's looking for him, and he keeps doing these acts of kindness. I enjoyed her seeing the elevator scene from the start of the episode and looking into that. But it's this thing where she realizes, there's that moment of realizing she's doing this little sting operation thinking she's going to catch the guy in the suit, and then when she sees the girl and the girl says, my friend said I could trust you, there's that moment of realization, and this is, I guess, good acting on Henson's part, but there's that change in her face, that realization of, he's using me to help someone, which only further murkies the waters of like, okay, we're chasing this guy because he's technically killing a bunch of people, but why is he killing all these people? It kind of seems like he's got maybe some noble causes, perhaps, and that's maybe something that's going to build up over the episodes. But yeah, for me, the big things this episode were obviously the flashbacks and the setting up of Finchie's sort of morals, right, and how he's going to get to that point where he feels he needs to do this, where it's not just about being good, it's also making up for who he was and how little he cared before. So I think that's a big deal. And then just the way it does the flashbacks, I think, are really interesting. And then the big sort of present day thing for me is the back and forth and the friendship, or the lack of friendship, but what will probably become a friendship between Finch and Reese and their back and forth. But this episode reiterated everything you needed from the first episode, in case you didn't see that first one. It established that Carter's kind of investigation and relationship to Reese, and that relationship being, who is this guy? I'm looking for him. Oh, but I'm also the good cop that he's going to send stuff to. It reiterates that Lionel's dirty and that Reese has him under his control to some extent. It reiterates all the key things with the premise. So it does all that stuff. It reiterates everything. And most episode 2s do this because they make this assumption that not everyone saw the first episode, and they want to try to make a lot of the early episodes very easy to jump into on their own. And I felt a lot of that here. So, but I am happy to say there was a lot of little things, if you're paying attention for them and you're really... And I think the other thing I would say as well is that it does feel like there's a little bit more... talent maybe feels a bit harsh, but I would say there's a bit more talent in how this show is produced versus some other more generic procedural TV, in that there's a lot of moments in the main action plot, and whether it's the hitman interrogating the uncle or some of the bits with Reese, something as simple as Reese just crashing this big garbage truck or whatever it is into the car at one point to get, because the whole mob thing actually ties back to like a senator or so. There's so many like details to this plot that I don't think are really that important, other than just specifically to this main plot. But like just moments like that actually feel kind of cool, and I think the show is doing a good job of actually feeling like it's got some style, which I don't think that a lot of procedural TV generally has. I'm like the composer of the music in this, I don't necessarily always love, but I do think they're doing a good job with establishing some key main themes. There's kind of that main kind of drum beat and sort of like quick strings that come in when Reese is about to do something cool, and it feels it's not Terminator-y, but I want to say it's kind of Terminator-y in a sense, in that it's kind of this like pulsing drum beat, and the way, but it's got the strings going up and down a little bit, so it kind of sounds, I don't know, it's really good at building anticipation, right? The show is very good at building the anticipation to those moments where something's about to happen, and it sort of plays with those expectations a little bit. So, no, very good. So. No, it's a solid second episode. I don't think it's like an amazing second episode. It's not the main plots. It's fine. And I feel like I'm going to say that about a lot of these early episodes, is that some of them are just they're going to do the job. They're going to be entertaining enough, but it's going to be all the little things around it that I'm probably going to focus on more for a while, because that's the stuff that's actually more interesting as a fan of long form storytelling. But obviously, doing all these little adventures episode to episode does also build up the camaraderie with the characters, and it builds up this sense that they're doing a lot. So that later on, when we do get to the other stuff, it's going to feel like we have actually helped lots of people by this point. So yeah, we'll see what episode 3 brings. Let me know what you thought of episode 2 of Person of Interest in the comments. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, all that stuff. You can get us on the Twitters at mailed_fuzz for channel updates, but of course you can go over to patreon.com/mailfuzztv and support us over there for as little as, you can, any amount really, but the first tier is $3 and get some bonuses for your trouble, but it helps keep all the content coming, so thank you very much. Also check out Mailfuzz Movies, the other YouTube channel with all the movie podcast content. I recommend it. Of course I would, I'm biased, but go have a look. But that is the show. Thank you very much for joining us. I always appreciate it. I said us there. I'm so used to doing shows with other people. But the royal us. Thank you once again. I'll see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?